Hey everybody, it's Allie, the Canine Nutritionist from Padfoot Palms, and I am coming to you very early this morning. Oh, that's a goat horn. I was like, did somebody poop on the floor? It's a goat horn. Sorry. So I'm coming to you very early this morning to talk to you a little bit about AFFCO, right? The AFFCO, which is a company that oversees feed, not just pet food, but feed in general in the United States. And I say company because they are not a regulatory entity. And I also wanted to talk about WSAVA, right? The WSAVA. And I'm going to read a couple of questions that WSAVA.org has listed as their recommendations to help consumers find a pet food. I've seen a lot of, back and forth about one is better than the other, and I'm actually going to talk to you today so that you can decide if one is better than the other or if both are actually lacking. So stick around. So the very first question is, do you have a veterinary nutritionist or equivalent on staff in your company? That's the first part of question one. So I take issue with this question because most companies, whether they are small companies, medium-sized companies, large companies, do not have a veterinary nutritionist on staff. Especially if they do not formulate veterinary diets. And I put that in quotation because those diets are not complete and balanced for the most part. And there's something that, veterinarians have a tendency to prescribe, but we'll get more into that later. So most companies, having worked for dog food companies, I can tell you, will contract a veterinary nutritionist or a canine nutritionist to create a formula or a line of pet food, and then they will pay them for those services, and then they have that food. And the next time they are in need of a nutritionist, they will, of course, do the same process. So what's the problem with this question? The problem with this question is that right off the bat, the very first thing, they're already starting you down a very specific path. And the reason why I have a problem with this is because I am of the mindset that you should educate the pet owner so that they can have the tools needed to be able to evaluate pet foods on their own and make educated choices based on their specific pet's needs, because nobody knows your dog like you do. Nobody knows your cat like you do. So to make these kind of blanket statements or these questions that are so geared to push you in a certain direction, I take issue with, because I feel like you're really limiting what people can do. Because like I said, most companies do not have a veterinary nutritionist on staff. And I find it interesting that that's their first question, because it's going to eliminate so many companies right off the bat. The second part of this question is, are they available for consultations or questions? They are veterinary nutritionists who are being paid to consult about pet food for that company. They are not being paid so that they can answer questions or do a phone consultation. That's usually something that you have to do on your own. A consultation, with a veterinary nutritionist from a university, or a canine nutritionist, or a small animal nutritionist, whichever route you go, that's usually a consultation that cost money, and that they do, one-on-one. There's an entire questionnaire that's filled out. It's a whole process, is my point. What I think that they're referring to here is, can you email your questions to a company, and then that company has someone on staff who then directs you which of their food products to purchase. That's the way it sounds to me. And again, that's because the first part of the question was so leading. So we've already started off a little rough. Let's take a look at the second question. Who formulates your foods and what are their credentials? Okay, well, if I was on the receiving end of this, if you called into customer service and I was your rep, this second question is kind of redundant, right? If you're asking about, do you have a veterinary nutritionist on staff? Okay, well, let's assume the answer to that was no, because that's what it's going to be for most companies. And then who formulates your foods and what are their credentials? Okay, well, it's formulated by, a veterinary nutritionist. Okay, or a canine nutritionist. Okay. What are their credentials? I mean, someone in customer service answering that question may or may not know. So I feel like they're kind of already setting the company up for failure. So that question is problematic because they may not know, especially with a veterinary canine nutritionist or a veterinary nutritionist in general. They may have any number of specialties or degrees or, certifications. Like, I'm not sure somebody would know that right off of hand. Again, if you were emailing these questions to a company, I could see them having time to come up with the answers. Which of your diets are tested using AFFCO feeding trials and which by nutrient analysis? Okay, the challenge with AFFCO feeding trials is that the requirements are so bare minimum. I mean, essentially, if 60% of the dogs don't die while eating the food for 16 weeks, then it's undergone. Then that food has undergone an AFFCO feeding trial. That's pretty scary. As a canine nutritionist who has been formulating and testing recipes for my future book, that's kind of, I know, Jade, that's scary. To say that you could have a feeding trial that was so short, the blood work that they do is so minimal that, one of the requirements is that, only 60% of the participants live through the trial. I mean, that's pretty bad. Could you imagine a human feeding trial? Hey, we're going to try out this new supplement and only 60% of the humans have to live through it. What? How does that make sense? They also, they don't take into account if any of those dogs in the feeding trial ended up having any kind of issues as far as diseases or whatever. I mean, it's basically just people in their home and they're going off of the honor system that they are feeding the food as they are told to feed it, like the amount that they're feeding. Anyway, if you want to research these feeding trials, please do so, because it's not what people think it is. So I take issue with that. And which by nutrient analysis. Okay, so if you look on your bag of dog food, for example, you'll see a nutrient analysis. The challenge that I have with this is in the US, they are allowed to put minimum and maximum for nutrient analysis. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means you could have a minimum of 9% fat and a maximum of 20% fat. Oh, okay, well, that doesn't help the consumer who's going and trying to pick out a pet food, who's maybe looking for something that's lower in fat because their dog has pancreatitis, right? They can't see exactly how much fat is said to be in that food because there's a range. So how does that help anybody? So that's where I take issue with that. Also, along the lines of nutrient analysis, take a look at your bag and see if the carbs are listed. Just go ahead. I'll wait. Just go take a look right now. I'll save you the trouble. It's not. So, next question. What specific quality control measures do you use to assure the consistency and quality of your product line? You are going to get some generic toe the company line answer here. It's not going to be anything specific. And if it was specific, unless you are versed in manufacturing of pet foods, you're not going to have any clue what they're talking about. You know, if they're like, oh yeah, well, we clean the vats that we cook the kibble in, every 10 minutes to cut down on bacteria, right? Okay, but you have no idea, just as your average Joe consumer, how often those are supposed to be cleaned. What are the rules about things like that? You see what I'm saying? So while I appreciate that question and the goal, I just don't feel like you're going to get any kind of real answer here. You're just going to get corporate mumbo jumbo. Next up, where are your foods produced and manufactured, and can this plant be visited? Okay, so the challenge that I have with this question is, where are the foods produced and manufactured? More than likely, they're going to say in the US, but it doesn't talk anything about, where are the ingredients sourced? If all of your ingredients come from China or some new no-name company that just started up because the ingredients are cheap, then where the food is produced and manufactured really doesn't mean anything other than you can slap a made in the USA label on it, even though all the ingredients came from China. So that's something to think about. Can this plant be visited? Can you walk into the Hershey's plant? Can you walk into Ford and go up to the machines and look at them, putting a car together? Like this kind of questioning, while I understand the point of it, it's really kind of silly. Unless you're local to that manufacturing plant, you're not going to be able to go there. Are you going to book a flight and go to Pennsylvania and check out their plant? And even then, are you even going to know what you're looking at? So I take issue with these questions because I feel like they're setting up a lot of companies to say, well, no, we don't do public tours of our plant. And then the consumer is led to believe that this is bad, right? Oh, well, you don't let people come in, well, that's bad. Well, actually, most manufacturing plants, for safety reasons, are not going to allow Joe Schmo to just walk into their plant one day because they want to see how stuff's made, right? So you got to use a little common sense here. Moving on to the next question. Will you provide a complete product nutrient analysis for this dog and or cat food of interest, including digestibility values? So again, this kind of falls into the, how much research has been done on this line of food. And not all companies have millions and millions of dollars to put into research. And the digestibility values really, that's going to be subjective based on the dog, the breed, the food, what's in the food. So, the other thing to consider is, even if they said yes, that they had this analysis and provided it to you, you would want to look at the date of when that study was done. Was it done 10, 15 years ago? Okay. Is that recipe for that dog food the same? No, it's not. Totally different ingredients? Okay, well, that study just became a moot point. So, again, I feel like these questions are very leading, and at this point, they're becoming misleading. So the next question is, what is the caloric value per gram, can, or cup of your foods? You can find this information on the back of the bag. I don't know about other countries, but in the US, the kcals are listed right on the bag. What kind of research on your products has been conducted, and are those results published in peer-reviewed journals? Okay, first of all, most companies who do research on their food, including the ones that these guys are trying to push you towards, don't make all of their research available to the public. Because not everything makes it to the shelf. Not everything is relevant to what they're selling now. Not everything makes them look good. Sometimes you do a research on a food and you find out, hey, this is severely lacking in calcium, or this is severely lacking in vitamin A, right? And they have to go back to the drawing board. They're not going to make that information available to the public. And even if they did, are you going to read a 20-page study about a specific food that this dog company made? Again, there are some people out there who will say, well, yes, Allie, I would read it. And I would say, that's fantastic, but you're in the minority. I would read it, but that's because I love stuff like that. I'm also versed in reading that type of material. Those veterinary research studies are not in layman's terms. They can be very boring. They can be, very long. It's just, again, the people who read those are in the minority. I feel like you're really doing a disservice to your average customer by posing this question, because it may or may not be relevant. One of the things that they list under items to consider for homemade foods is consider the sources, the amounts of protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, and minerals. Let me stop you right there. So nowhere when they are evaluating commercial food do they mention protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins. Let's back up to carbohydrates. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned that the nutrient analysis does not list carbohydrates, but if you're evaluating a homemade food, they want you to look at the carbohydrates. Again, I feel like that's misleading. Why wasn't that mentioned earlier? Why are we not evaluating the carbohydrates of commercial food, of kibble? Well, the answer to that is they don't want you to, because most kibble is very high in carbohydrates, which is not ideal for optimal health. So, not saying that carbs are bad. Don't mislead me there. But I am saying that I think it's interesting that when you jump down to evaluate home food section, all of a sudden now we're very concerned about the protein and the carbohydrates and the fats. Whereas before it was all about, well, do you have a veterinary nutritionist on staff? It's just keep that in mind. Their next point to consider is consider specific needs of cats. For homemade food, I feel like that's absolutely an acceptable option. Most of the people watching here are probably doing commercial food, but if you are doing a homemade food for your cat, that is a viable question. I don't take any issue with that. Contact a board certified veterinary nutritionist or equivalent. So for instance, a canine nutritionist to formulate a homemade diet. Again, I don't take any issue with this point that they're making, because I 100% support that you should follow a complete and balanced recipe if you are doing any kind of homemade food, whether it's home cooked, raw, doesn't matter. You should be following a complete and balanced recipe, not just winging it, especially if you're feeding puppies. Okay, I won't get off on a tangent. Okay, evaluate any unconventional diet, whether commercial or homemade, for nutritional balances. Okay, I don't have any problem with that, except their very next point is they start talking about raw foods. So right off the bat, They've already set you up to have a negative connotation or a negative idea about homemade foods and raw foods. So I take issue with that. Again, I think we should be empowering people, not telling them what to think. Okay. And then the rest of it is just, different sources that they've linked to, different websites. So what does all of this mean? Well, it means that when you take advice from someone, you need to really think critically about what they're trying to sell you, right? So, for example, I have a list of recommended foods in my Pad Foot Palms Facebook group. It was highly requested. It was not something that I wanted to do, but I found myself going through and trying to help people and all of these comments, and I couldn't keep up with giving everybody options, so I decided to make the list. My intention for that recommended foods list was never for people to just join the group, go to the recommended foods list, scroll down the little list, find something, pick it out, feed that, and feed that for the rest of their dog's life. That was never my intention. And that was the main reason why I didn't want to make the list. Because I know that there are people out there who will do that. And you have no idea how sad that makes me. Because what I want to do is help give you, the consumer, the tools to be able to evaluate the ingredients, right? That's why I have a list of problematic ingredients that I update regularly. To be able to look at the nutrient analysis and calculate the carbs so that you can make an educated choice about what you need to do for your dog's food. By giving you those tools, you can evaluate the food yourself. You don't need somebody else to tell you how to do it. So you can go out into the pet food store. You can go and look online and look at the ingredients. What I would love is for everyone to stop looking at the front of the bag before you get sucked into any kind of research or any of those unregulated marketing terms that they use, like grain-free, grain-inclusive, ancient grains, your mama's grains, homemade and human grade, premium. All of that is garbage. You don't need to read any of it. When I go in and look at a pet food or a treat or a bone or anything that the dog is going to be ingesting, I don't even look at the front of the bag. I either turn it to the side or turn it to the back, and I'm reading that ingredient list, and that's where you should start. This nutritional assessment guidelines, nowhere in there does it say anything about the ingredients of the food. It doesn't say anything about the first thing you should do is look at the ingredients. Why is that? Well, that's because these big pet food companies don't want you looking at the ingredients. They don't want you looking at, corn gluten meal, animal byproducts, animal digest, sorghum, grain sorghum, rice syrup, which is essentially sugar. All these, unnecessary additional carbohydrates, potatoes, peas. They don't want you looking at the ingredient list. Because if you start there, you'll save yourself so much time when you're looking at food or treats. Before you get roped into all of the marketing mumbo jumbo, if you just flip that bag over and look at the ingredients and you don't know what half of them are, or it's claiming to be beef flavored and you don't see any beef listed, then you can put that bag down and move on to something else. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about giving you the tools to be able to do it yourself. Don't rely on a step-by-step guideline that is obviously biased. I don't care if it comes from AFFCO or WSAVA or a Facebook group that you're in. Start by looking at the ingredients and take it from there. If you want to start with the ingredients and there are no or minimal problematic ingredients, and then you want to take it from there and go through these guidelines, absolutely knock yourself out. But you just have to think critically about which direction they're trying to push you in. So anyway, I hope that you found this video helpful. I know that it ended up being much longer than I intended, but it's important to me that I give you as much information as I can. So thank you so much. If you've made it to the end of the video, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out a lot. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, you've got to join. You are missing out. We are a super positive, very supportive group, and I would love for you to be a part of it. So from all of my sleepy crew behind me and myself, I hope that you're having a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.